Claire's hands shook as the words echoed back at her from the diary page she'd accidentally left open. Her own handwriting, raw and painfully honest. I wish he'd cheat just once, so I'd have an excuse to leave. She'd never imagined Daniel would see this, never thought he'd quietly pack his bags and vanish without anger or confrontation. But that morning, the bedroom felt emptier, colder, filled only with the haunting silence of a love she'd never truly embraced. Her throat tightened as she clutched the faded letter that started it all, slipped from a customer's returned book, whispering truths she'd spent years running from. Now alone, facing the very freedom she'd feared, Claire wondered desperately, how could someone leaving gently hurt more than betrayal? Have you ever lost someone by staying quiet too long? Tell me your story below. Claire Bennett had always been good at smiling softly, even when she felt anything but gentle inside. At 47, she owned the second chapter, a small bookstore, nestled quietly among the quaint houses of Greenville, Maine, a town where neighbors knew the exact blend of tea you liked, yet rarely sensed the invisible fractures behind your polite greetings. Each morning she walked along cobblestone paths, lined with white picket fences and blooming lilacs, nodding warmly to familiar faces. Her shop smelled faintly of lavender, old pages, and memories preserved between forgotten bookmarks. Soft jazz played quietly from the vintage radio Daniel had gifted her 3 birthdays ago, its tunes a gentle reminder of stability she couldn't quite cherish. To everyone else, Claire's life appeared perfectly content, a serene woman with a patient partner who adored her unconditionally. Daniel Harris, a soft-spoken high school teacher, had a way of loving quietly yet fiercely, his eyes always softening whenever Claire entered a room. But behind her composed smiles, Claire felt suffocated, not by cruelty or neglect, but paradoxically, by Daniel's endless patience, his unspoken acceptance of the truth she herself had avoided for years. She could never love him as completely as he deserved. It felt like breathing shallowly beneath water, alive, but never fully free. Their cozy home on Maple Street, filled with framed photographs and handmade quilts, only intensified Claire's quiet despair. The warmth of their shared dinners and casual conversations each evening became subtle reminders of the connection she'd never truly felt. Her daughter Rose, now away at college, often called, sensing her mother's hidden sadness, yet Claire always reassured her softly, determined not to burden her child with truths she could barely confront herself. Sometimes Claire would watch Daniel, reading peacefully across the room, unaware of her inner turmoil, and wonder how 2 people could share everything but true intimacy. She longed to speak, to confess her fears, but silence seemed kinder, until it wasn't. Now, standing in her bookstore, holding a faded letter that mirrored her deepest secret, Claire knew silence had cost her more than any words ever could. She wondered gently if others, too, had ever quietly lived a life just beyond their reach. Have you ever kept quiet to protect someone you love, only to lose yourself? I'd love to hear your experience. It started with a phone call on a mild Wednesday afternoon. Claire was rearranging books on the wooden shelves, lost in the calm monotony of sorting novels alphabetically, when the gentle chime of her phone broke the silence. She glanced at the screen, heart skipping softly at the familiar name she hadn't seen for far too long. Sarah Langley. Claire? The voice, warm and cautiously hopeful, brought an unexpected wave of nostalgia. Sarah, it's been forever. Claire breathed, feeling something stir quietly within her chest, a delicate ache she'd long forgotten. Sarah had been her closest friend, her confidant throughout childhood and into their chaotic 20s, but life had gradually drawn them apart. Marriage, children, divorce. Each had traveled her own tangled path, losing touch along the way. Hearing Sarah now felt like reaching back into a younger, freer version of herself. They spoke cautiously at first, sharing gentle laughter about the gray hairs they'd hidden and the loves they'd lost. But beneath Sarah's casual words, Claire sensed deeper shadows. Sarah revealed she'd moved back to Greenville after her recent divorce, returning to their hometown to rebuild herself from scratch. "Everything changed so quickly, Claire," Sarah admitted softly, a slight tremble threading through her voice. "One moment I was planning my future, the next I was starting over." Claire leaned against the bookshelf, absorbing her friend's quiet vulnerability. She knew exactly what Sarah meant, had known it intimately once. But now she found herself wondering if perhaps she had simply buried her own restlessness beneath routine, convinced herself that quiet safety was better than daring to start again. When she ended the call, a strange unease lingered. The bookstore seemed smaller, somehow darker, as if Sarah's return had opened a window Claire hadn't noticed was tightly shut. Through that window, the past beckoned gently, reminding Claire of her own buried truths, the ones she'd chosen to forget for Daniel's sake, and perhaps even more, for her own fragile comfort. That evening, Daniel prepared dinner as he always did, meticulously, lovingly. Claire watched him from the doorway, noticing the gentle crease of concentration between his eyebrows, his familiar routine somehow alien now, as if she were observing a stranger through distant glass. Daniel glanced up, smiling warmly, unaware that something invisible had shifted within Claire, something too subtle to pinpoint, yet undeniable in its quiet persistence. After dinner, Daniel cleared the table, humming softly, contentedly, as he rinsed the dishes. Claire lingered in silence, the quiet ticking of the kitchen clock punctuating her thoughts. She realized suddenly, painfully, that she'd grown accustomed to Daniel's kindness, but never his closeness. He'd always seemed just slightly out of reach. Not because he distanced himself, but because she'd never fully leaned in. "Is everything okay?" Daniel asked gently, drying his hands. His question was sincere, always genuine, and yet tonight it felt burdensome. Claire forced a smile, nodding softly, hating herself a little for her dishonesty. "Yes, just tired," she murmured. But inside she wished for something, anything, to disrupt their polite, fragile equilibrium. A selfish, dark thought flickered, briefly through her mind. What if Daniel did something wrong, something unforgivable? Wouldn't that be easier than facing the truth, that her heart had never been fully his? As she lay awake later, staring into the darkness, Claire replayed Sarah's words. "I'm starting over." Could she, too, start again? The idea frightened her, yet oddly thrilled her, like standing at the edge of a great height, fearful yet inexplicably tempted to leap. Daniel slept quietly beside her, his breathing steady and reassuring, but it was precisely this steadiness that made her restless. In the days that followed, Claire's conversations with Sarah became frequent, deeper, dredging memories long untouched. She found herself gradually reconnecting to the woman she'd once been, someone who'd dared to seek genuine happiness rather than settle quietly into comfortable melancholy. Each quiet admission Sarah shared about her divorce nudged Claire closer to acknowledging her own hidden truth. She had never truly loved Daniel enough, never risked her heart completely for fear of breaking it again. One afternoon, while tidying up the shop, Claire came across a small notebook she'd misplaced long ago. Flipping through its pages, she paused abruptly, recognizing her own handwriting, unmistakably raw. "Staying isn't love if it's only to avoid hurting someone." Her throat constricted sharply. When had she lost sight of that simple truth? She closed the notebook gently, glancing toward the window as Daniel waved from outside, smiling warmly. Claire waved back mechanically, her heart quietly cracking. Under the weight of understanding that something fundamental had already begun to unravel. On a rainy Sunday morning, Claire found herself seated quietly in Evelyn Cole's tea shop, cupping her hands around a steaming mug of chamomile tea, the warmth spreading gently through her fingertips. Soft classical music played in the background, weaving through the murmurs of conversation, creating a comforting cocoon around her solitude. But Claire's mind wandered restlessly, tangled in half-formed questions and uneasy reflections stirred by Sarah's return. Lost in thought, she barely noticed when the shop's door chimed gently, signaling another visitor. But something familiar in the hushed greeting caught her attention. Daniel's voice, unusually quiet and restrained, speaking to Evelyn by the counter. Claire turned slightly, not yet ready to announce herself, inadvertently hearing snippets of their whispered exchange. "It's harder than I thought, Evelyn," Daniel said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've known for a long time she never really loved me, not fully, but I guess I convinced myself she'd change." His words were filled with quiet acceptance rather than bitterness, a resignation that hit Claire harder than any accusation ever could. Evelyn sighed gently, offering him comfort with quiet sympathy. "Love is complicated, dear. Claire cares deeply. I know she does. Perhaps she simply doesn't know how to love differently." Daniel nodded slowly, his shoulders slumped, slightly, carrying the invisible weight of a truth he'd silently borne for years. "Maybe I shouldn't have stayed. Maybe I held her back, Evelyn." Claire's breath caught sharply in her throat, her chest tightening painfully. All these years, she had thought herself quietly enduring, never once considering Daniel had been doing exactly the same, patiently hoping she might someday love him differently, love him enough. How could she have missed his silent suffering beneath all that tenderness? She left the shop unnoticed, stepping out into the steady drizzle, her heart pounding with an intensity she'd not felt in years. Daniel's quiet confession lingered, echoing through her consciousness like the steady rhythm of rain around her. She walked aimlessly, her feet splashing softly through shallow puddles, until she found herself standing on the quiet shore of Greenville's small lake. The water stretched calmly before her, gray and tranquil, reflecting the storm clouds above, a mirror to the quiet turmoil swirling gently inside her chest. Claire sat down on an old wooden bench facing the lake, oblivious to the cold dampness seeping through her coat. Her thoughts turned inward, replaying Daniel's words in an endless loop. She never really loved me. Not fully. Had she been blind, or simply unwilling to see that her quiet distance had hurt him as deeply as open rejection? The gentle sound of rain became a backdrop to her reflections, and memories began drifting slowly to the surface. Moments when Daniel had waited patiently, offered love quietly, never asking for anything more than she willingly gave. Yet beneath that kindness had been a silent pain, the invisible strain of holding on to someone who never truly belonged to him. Claire realized with quiet devastation that her fear of hurting Daniel had ironically caused far more damage than honesty ever could. She had convinced herself that silence was compassion, staying was kindness, and in doing so, imprisoned them both in a love neither fully shared nor understood. She wondered how often true love required painful honesty rather than comfortable silence. As the rain eased gently into a fine mist, Claire finally rose, brushing damp hair from her eyes. She knew something fundamental had changed within her, an irreversible awareness that staying together quietly was perhaps more painful than bravely facing the truth alone. She felt simultaneously lighter and heavier, freed by her newfound clarity, yet burdened by the weight of overdue decisions. Returning home, Claire found Daniel quietly reading by the fireplace, his usual serene demeanor masking a deeper melancholy she could now clearly sense. He looked up and smiled softly, yet Claire saw beyond that gentle expression, recognizing quiet resignation in his gaze. She stepped toward him hesitantly, her heart aching with the weight of everything still unsaid. "Daniel," she began quietly, voice wavering slightly, "do you ever wish you'd chosen differently?" He considered her question thoughtfully, then met her gaze, eyes gentle yet candid. "I've wished for many things, Claire, but mostly I've wished for your happiness, even if it wasn't with me." His words hung softly between them, a tender confession heavy with the ache of unconditional love. Claire felt tears prickling gently at her eyes, realizing the quiet bravery it took Daniel to admit such a vulnerable truth. She reached out instinctively, her hand brushing lightly against his arm, their shared silence becoming more intimate than words had ever allowed. In that fragile moment, Claire finally understood the depth of Daniel's sacrifice and the quiet courage he'd shown by loving her without expectation, without resentment, despite knowing she might never love him completely. She took a deep breath, gathering the strength to speak the words she'd avoided for far too long. But before she could find her voice, Daniel stood up gently, offering a reassuring smile, and quietly left the room, giving her space, as he always did. She stared silently after him, heart breaking gently under the weight of a newfound truth. Perhaps love was never about staying, but knowing when it was kinder to leave. Have you ever discovered the truth too late? I'd love to read your story below. In the days following Daniel's quiet admission, Claire found herself retreating further into reflection, often caught staring absently through the shop window, thoughts drifting far beyond Greenville's familiar streets. Her bookstore, once a safe haven, now felt strangely confining. The neatly organized shelves and comforting scent of aged paper unable to soothe the gentle restlessness that had begun to stir within her. Sarah visited often, as if sensing Claire's silent struggle. They would sit in a quiet corner of the shop, sipping coffee and talking softly, their conversations meandering gently between shared memories and tender admissions. Claire found unexpected comfort in Sarah's candidness, her friend's bravery, in facing uncomfortable truths, offering a quiet encouragement to do the same. One rainy afternoon, sitting together near the window, Sarah leaned forward, eyes earnest. "Claire, when did you first realize things weren't right between you and Daniel?" Claire hesitated, her fingers absently tracing circles on the porcelain rim of her coffee cup. She looked away briefly, collecting herself. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Maybe it was always there, beneath everything, just something quiet I ignored." Sarah watched her friend gently, understanding flickering in her gaze. "Ignoring something doesn't make it disappear, Claire. Trust me, I tried." Claire nodded softly, thinking back to those early days with Daniel, days filled with gratitude rather than passion. After the pain of her divorce, she had been grateful simply to be cherished, grateful for stability, mistaking that quiet comfort for love. But gratitude had quietly become obligation, and obligation had eventually become silence. She began sharing softly with Sarah those quiet evenings she spent sitting across from Daniel at the dinner table, their conversations comfortable, yet rarely intimate. She described moments when Daniel would reach for her hand, and she would respond politely, affectionately, but never with the unguarded vulnerability love demanded. Sarah listened thoughtfully, her presence a quiet anchor. Finally, she asked, softly, "Claire, were you ever truly happy with Daniel? Or did you just believe you were supposed to be?" The question hung gently between them, quietly profound. Claire felt tears forming softly at the corners of her eyes, her throat tightening as she finally admitted aloud what she'd hidden even from herself. "I was never unhappy enough to leave, but I was never fully happy either. I guess I was afraid of hurting him." Sarah reached across the table, gently squeezing Claire's hand. "Maybe the greatest hurt comes not from leaving, but from staying quietly in a love that isn't real." That night, alone in the quiet darkness of her bedroom, Claire pulled out her old diaries, tracing her younger handwriting with tender nostalgia. Page after page revealed truths she'd carefully tucked away, brief, hesitant entries confessing uncertainty, quiet longing, and hidden dreams. She discovered again the younger version of herself, who had once dreamed fiercely of love that consumed and transformed, rather than simply comforted. Flipping through faded pages, Claire paused on a particular entry from 8 years ago, the night Daniel first spoke of marriage. Her words were painfully honest. "He loves me more than I can handle. I'm afraid I can't ever give him the love he deserves." Reading them now, years later, Claire felt the gentle ache of knowing she had quietly betrayed herself by ignoring that quiet truth. Days passed gently, each one deepening her introspection. Her conversations with Sarah grew more honest, each revelation peeling back another quiet layer of self-deception, revealing truths she had long avoided. The bookstore, once merely a place of comfort, became a sanctuary for this quiet unraveling. Each shelf, each book, bearing witness to her gradual awakening. One quiet morning, as Claire sorted through a box of donated books, she found a faded copy of Little Women, the pages worn lovingly thin. Opening it, she found a bookmark tucked carefully inside, a small pressed flower, brittle but preserved beautifully over decades. Something about that delicate memento stirred quietly within her, reminding her sharply of how long it had been since she allowed herself to feel something deeply, passionately. As she gently closed the book, Evelyn entered the shop, her presence warm and comforting. Claire invited her to sit, eager for Evelyn's gentle wisdom. Over tea, Claire shared hesitantly about the diary pages she'd reread, the truths she could no longer ignore, the quiet guilt that had begun gnawing at her conscience. Evelyn listened quietly, nodding thoughtfully, her expression filled with gentle empathy. "Love is not always about staying, Claire. Sometimes it's about knowing when it's kinder to walk away, both for yourself and for the one you love." Claire stared into her teacup, tears forming softly once more. "But Daniel has given me everything, Evelyn. His patience, kindness, unconditional love. How can I just leave?" Evelyn reached out, gently covering Claire's hand with her own. "Because love that isn't genuine is never truly kind, dear. It quietly breaks both people, piece by gentle piece." Their quiet conversation lingered long. After Evelyn had gone, her words echoing gently, insistently in Claire's heart. She spent that evening walking slowly around the lake, allowing her thoughts to drift freely, finally acknowledging the quiet truth she'd feared for so long. She'd chosen security over passion, comfort over courage, kindness over honesty, and in doing so, she'd lost herself quietly, gradually, in ways she was only now beginning to understand. Returning home that night, Claire found Daniel asleep on the couch, a book resting open on his chest. She stood silently, watching him with quiet tenderness mixed with quiet sorrow. How could she gently dismantle the comfortable life they'd carefully built, even knowing its foundation was quietly flawed? She gently draped a blanket over Daniel, watching him stir lightly, but not wake. Quietly, softly, Claire whispered a truth she'd only just discovered within herself. "You deserve someone who can love you fully, and I deserve to find out who I truly am." The words hung softly in the air, a quiet promise and an unspoken goodbye, as Claire turned gently away, knowing their story had quietly begun to reach its inevitable turning point. In the gentle stillness of early morning, Claire woke to the soft light filtering through the lace curtains, illuminating tiny particles drifting gently in the air. Beside her, Daniel slept soundly, his breathing calm, even, untouched by the quiet turmoil now steadily consuming her heart. Watching him, she felt the sharp sting of guilt. How unfair it seemed that one could quietly dismantle someone else's life with mere honesty. She rose quietly, careful not to wake him, slipping into the kitchen where the soft hum of the refrigerator provided a gentle comfort. Claire prepared coffee slowly, methodically, her hands moving out of habit rather than intention, while her mind drifted quietly elsewhere, lost in questions she no longer had the courage to evade. Her conversation with Evelyn echoed persistently, whispering truths she'd long refused to face openly. Had staying quietly beside Daniel truly been kindness, or merely cowardice masked as compassion? She had convinced herself for years that loving someone meant enduring quietly, sacrificing her own desires for their contentment. But at what cost? Claire sipped her coffee slowly, eyes drifting toward framed photographs scattered across the living room shelves. Images of Rose's childhood smiles mingled softly with moments of quiet happiness she'd shared with Daniel. Their expressions always gentle, reserved, never fully alive. Even then, had they both quietly sensed something incomplete? Was their quiet restraint a subtle acknowledgement that their love had always been more polite than passionate? Lost in contemplation, Claire didn't notice Daniel entering the kitchen until he gently rested his hand on her shoulder, startling her softly. She glanced up quickly, masking her thoughts behind a quiet smile, but Daniel's eyes searched her face gently, his intuition as sharp as ever. "You seem distant lately," he said softly. No accusation, only quiet concern. Claire hesitated, 1,000 quiet truths pressing urgently at the tip of her tongue. But habit, and perhaps fear, made her respond with gentle reassurance. "Just tired, that's all." He studied her thoughtfully, silently weighing her words before quietly nodding, accepting her gentle deflection, though clearly unconvinced. He pressed no further, simply squeezing her shoulder softly before stepping toward the pantry to begin breakfast preparations, leaving Claire feeling quietly hollow, wishing desperately she'd found the courage to speak honestly. Days blended into weeks, and Claire drifted further into introspection. Her evenings were spent quietly reading old diaries and letters, piecing together fragments of herself she'd quietly abandoned. With each page turned, Claire uncovered more truths she had quietly forgotten or deliberately hidden, passions she'd quietly set aside, dreams she'd gently abandoned in favor of quiet stability. Sarah became a frequent companion during these quiet weeks, their conversations growing deeper, filled with gentle vulnerability. Sarah shared softly about her own journey, of rediscovering herself after her divorce, about the quiet fear of being alone and the quiet bravery it took to begin again. Claire listened attentively, heart aching softly with recognition of her own quiet fears. On one such afternoon, walking slowly along Greenville's quiet streets, Claire confided hesitantly, "Sarah, I've spent so long afraid of hurting Daniel that I never noticed how quietly, how gently, I was hurting myself. And him." Sarah nodded gently, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. "Maybe true kindness is never about sacrificing your happiness, Claire. Maybe it's about allowing each other the freedom to find real love, no matter how quietly painful it might be at first." The quiet power of Sarah's words resonated deeply, settling gently yet firmly within Claire's heart. As days passed, that truth lingered quietly, insistently, guiding her closer to the difficult decision she'd long avoided. One evening, alone in the bookstore after closing, Claire found herself holding the faded letter again, tracing the delicate, faded handwriting that had quietly sparked this painful yet necessary awakening. Its simple honesty haunted her gently, reminding her of the quiet tragedy of a love sustained solely through silent compromise. Lost in thought, Claire barely registered the gentle tap at the shop door. Turning, she saw Evelyn waiting patiently, outside, offering a gentle wave. Claire opened the door quickly, welcoming her friend warmly. "I hope I'm not intruding," Evelyn said gently, stepping inside. "I just sensed you might need company." Claire smiled softly, grateful for Evelyn's quiet intuition. Over tea, Claire confessed quietly, yet bravely, all she had discovered about herself, the quiet desperation she'd quietly hidden beneath a calm exterior, the truths she'd long denied, and the quiet realization that she'd allowed fear to dictate her life. Evelyn listened with gentle patience, then spoke softly, yet firmly. "Claire, happiness doesn't often come from quiet acceptance of a life half-lived. It comes from daring to live fully, truthfully, even when it's frightening. After Evelyn left, Claire remained quietly in the shop, the gentle ticking of the old clock echoing softly. Her decision now felt quietly inevitable, gently unavoidable. Returning home that evening, Claire entered to find Daniel quietly reading, the scene achingly familiar, yet somehow altered now, fragile, as if their quiet balance had already begun to tip irreversibly. As Daniel glanced up, meeting her eyes gently, Claire felt her heart tighten painfully. He must have sensed the shift in her, yet waited patiently, as always, for her to speak. Taking a steadying breath, Claire softly approached, her voice quiet yet firm. "Daniel, we need to talk." He closed his book gently, setting it aside, and nodded quietly, eyes steady yet vulnerable, braced gently for what he had perhaps always quietly anticipated. Claire's heart ached sharply at the gentle strength in his acceptance. "I've spent so long trying not to hurt you that I never realized. I was hurting us both," she confessed quietly, her voice trembling slightly with quiet courage. "I think we both deserve more than quiet companionship. We deserve to find happiness that feels real, alive." Daniel remained quiet for a long, gentle moment, processing her words carefully. Finally, he spoke softly, tenderly. "I always hoped you'd say something like this, Claire. Not because I want to lose you, but because I've always quietly sensed you weren't truly happy." Claire felt gentle tears forming softly, touched by his quiet understanding, even now. She reached out gently, taking his hand quietly in hers, their shared silence filled with mutual respect, quiet grief, and gentle relief. As Claire sat quietly beside Daniel, the weight of their shared truth settled gently, powerfully between them, a quiet acknowledgement that their quiet journey together had reached its gentle yet inevitable crossroads. Their love, so long restrained by quiet kindness, now demanded quiet bravery instead. Courage to gently release one another, to face quiet uncertainty alone. Sitting silently together, neither speaking further, Claire felt her heart softly breaking open. Not in despair, but quiet liberation. For the first time in years, she breathed deeply, gently, finally accepting that the quiet path to true happiness sometimes required the courage to leave behind a love quietly cherished, yet never truly felt. In that quiet, shared acknowledgement, their futures hung softly yet uncertainly, both aware they stood gently on the threshold of a life yet uncharted, each quietly preparing to embrace the pain and promise of letting go. Have you ever faced a decision that required quiet bravery? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to read them. The following morning dawned gently, its soft golden glow filtering through the delicate lace curtains, bathing the room in warmth that felt oddly incongruous with Claire's heavy heart. Daniel had quietly packed a few things and left early, giving her space, understanding without needing explanation. The silence that greeted her now was gentle yet deafening, a stark reminder of how profoundly their quiet truths had shifted everything between them. Claire wandered slowly through the empty rooms, each step bringing forth gentle waves of memory. Quiet. Breakfast shared in comfortable silence, evenings spent reading side by side, peaceful routines masking deeper unspoken realities. Her fingers brushed lightly against familiar objects. The knitted blanket draped over the sofa, Daniel's favorite, mug resting clean and unused beside the sink. Each simple touch felt charged, quietly poignant, each object now both comforting and painfully bittersweet. She paused at their bedroom doorway, lingering silently, unsure whether to enter or avoid the memories it held. Gathering quiet courage, Claire stepped inside, her gaze immediately falling upon the small, leather-bound notebook resting innocuously on Daniel's bedside table, a book she'd often noticed but never dared to open, respecting his privacy as he respected hers. But today felt different, their quiet truths no longer confined neatly behind walls of polite silence. Taking a quiet breath, Claire reached slowly, gently opening the cover, her heart quickening softly at the familiar scrawl of Daniel's handwriting. Pages turned gently beneath her trembling fingers, revealing years of quiet confessions, brief yet profound entries Daniel had penned softly in the solitude of night, when she slept quietly beside him, unaware of the quiet ache filling his heart. Each entry gently illuminated the depth of Daniel's silent struggle, his quiet, relentless hope that someday she might love him fully. Claire read softly through pages marked by quiet loneliness, tender patience, and moments of quietly desperate honesty. She paused at one page, her breath catching quietly as she read Daniel's simple, devastating words. "I know she tries to love me, but I sometimes wish she would leave. Not because I want to lose her, but because seeing her unhappy quietly breaks my heart." Claire's eyes blurred softly with tears, her chest tightening gently yet painfully. She had always assumed her quiet restraint protected Daniel, shielded him from the harsher pain of open rejection. Yet here, in quiet black ink, lay the undeniable truth. Her silence had quietly wounded him far more deeply than honesty ever could. She sank gently onto the edge of the bed, notebook still clutched softly in her hands, her thoughts spinning quietly, overwhelmed by the quiet revelation. All these years, Daniel had quietly accepted her lukewarm affection, believing perhaps that someday, gently, her heart might open fully to him. But love, Claire now quietly understood, could never flourish in silence. It required honesty, even when painful, even when quietly devastating. Her gaze drifted softly toward the window, watching as the gentle breeze moved the branches of the old oak tree outside, steady, enduring, silently witnessing years of quiet moments shared between them. Claire wondered gently how many others, like her, had quietly mistaken loyalty for love, comfort for happiness, silence for kindness. Daniel's notebook lay quietly beside her now, each page filled with quiet truth urging gently at her heart, pushing her softly but firmly toward the inevitable. Claire knew that silence was no longer an option, had perhaps never truly been a kindness, despite its gentle disguise. She needed to speak openly, honestly, to finally set them both free. Yet even as that quiet certainty settled within her, Claire felt a gentle wave of fear. How could she dismantle the quiet world they'd built so carefully, knowing honesty would mean letting go of everything familiar, everything safe? Her heart fluttered gently in panic, yet beneath that quiet fear lay another, quieter truth. The life they'd created in silence had never truly belonged to either of them. Drawing strength from this quiet clarity, Claire stood gently, setting Daniel's notebook softly back onto the bedside table. She moved slowly toward the window, leaning gently against its frame, her thoughts drifting quietly toward Daniel, wondering softly where he was now, how he was quietly coping with their shared yet separate truths, as if answering her silent query. Claire's phone vibrated softly, startling her gently from reverie. She reached hesitantly, heart racing softly as Daniel's name appeared quietly on the screen. Taking a quiet, steadying breath, Claire answered gently, her voice trembling, slightly with quiet uncertainty. "Daniel?" She spoke softly, tentatively, unsure of how to bridge the gentle chasm now quietly opened between them. His voice returned softly, calmly, gentle yet firm. "Claire, I've been thinking. Maybe it's finally time we were honest, fully honest, with ourselves and each other." Claire's heart tightened quietly, overwhelmed by gentle gratitude and quiet sadness. "You're right," she whispered softly, tears forming gently once more, her voice choked quietly with emotion. "Daniel, I never meant—" "I know," Daniel interrupted gently. No bitterness in his voice, only quiet, tender understanding. "Neither did I." Their quiet conversation lingered softly, yet powerfully, each gentle word stripping away years of silence, layer by gentle layer, revealing truths long hidden beneath quiet denial. Claire felt her heart opening quietly yet fully for perhaps the first time, though not in romantic love, but in a gentle, profound understanding born of honesty and shared vulnerability. As the call ended quietly, Claire felt the gentle weight of the truth settling firmly yet softly within her heart. She knew now what she must do, knew quietly, deeply, that their quiet charade of happiness had finally reached its gentle, inevitable conclusion. Yet even in the quiet pain of that realization, Claire felt a gentle stirring. Hopeful, quiet, yet unmistakably real. Outside, the sun had quietly risen higher, bathing the town gently in clear, bright warmth. Claire stepped softly out onto the porch, breathing deeply, allowing the quiet beauty of the morning to soothe her gently frayed emotions. She stood quietly, heart open, yet aching, knowing that soon she would quietly, bravely face the gentle yet profound pain of saying goodbye. Later that afternoon, as the sun began its gentle descent behind Greenville's rooftops, Claire found herself standing quietly by the lakeside. Its calm surface reflected the twilight sky, a tapestry of soft lavender, muted orange, and pale, pink hues. The stillness around her was gentle, serene. Yet inside, Claire's heart raced quietly, anticipation and fear intertwined as she awaited Daniel's arrival. She'd asked him to meet her here, at the quiet spot they'd often walked together during those early hopeful days. Claire knew it would be painful, yet somehow fitting, that this place, once a symbol of quiet promise, would now witness the gentle end of their shared illusion. A quiet rustle announced Daniel's presence, and Claire turned slowly, heart tightening softly at the sight of him. He approached quietly, footsteps gentle yet deliberate, eyes reflecting the quiet ache she knew mirrored her own. For a moment, they stood quietly together, the silence heavy yet not unkind, each quietly gathering strength to face the honesty now required. Daniel spoke first, his voice gently hesitant yet resolved. "I've always loved this place," he began softly, gazing toward the lake. "Maybe because here, things always seemed simpler, clearer." Claire nodded gently, heart aching softly with recognition. "I think that's why I wanted us to meet here, to find clarity, even if it hurts." Daniel turned quietly to face her fully, his eyes gentle yet searching. "I read your diary, Claire, and I think maybe you found mine too. We've both known, quietly, for years." Claire felt gentle tears forming once again, nodding softly, her throat tightening quietly. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I thought staying meant kindness, but now I see. It was quietly selfish." He shook his head gently, stepping closer, his presence warm, comforting, familiar yet distant now in a new, quiet understanding. "You weren't selfish. You were scared, just like me. Scared of losing what felt safe, even if it meant losing ourselves quietly." Claire reached instinctively for his hand, feeling the quiet strength of his fingers around hers, gentle yet painfully distant. "I did love you, Daniel, but it was never the love you deserved. It was a quiet love, grateful but not passionate, safe, but never fully alive." Daniel's eyes softened gently, filled with quiet acceptance. "And I always knew, Claire. Maybe I hoped my love could be enough for both of us. But love can't live in quiet compromise forever." They stood quietly, the truth settling gently yet firmly between them, acknowledging years of silent denial finally spoken aloud. Claire looked out across the lake, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I wanted so badly to be the woman who could love you fully. I thought silence would protect us from pain, but it quietly stole years we can never reclaim." Daniel squeezed, her hand gently, his touch tender, comforting yet filled with quiet finality. We both stayed too long, hoping quietly that somehow things would change. But now, I think the kindest thing we can do is let go quietly, before the silence breaks us completely. Claire turned slowly, meeting his eyes again, her heart breaking softly, yet gently freeing itself with each quiet word spoken aloud. Do you think after everything we can still forgive ourselves for staying quiet? Daniel smiled gently, his expression tender, understanding, and deeply compassionate. Forgiveness comes gently, Claire, when we finally tell ourselves the truth. I forgave you long ago. Now, maybe, we can forgive ourselves. In that quiet moment, Claire felt her heart open softly yet completely, no longer bound by fear or silent compromise. She saw Daniel clearly now, gentle, patient, steadfast, yet finally understood that true kindness was not about holding tightly, but about quietly, bravely releasing each other to find genuine happiness elsewhere. They stood quietly side by side, watching the final remnants of daylight fade gently into twilight. Claire felt the quiet warmth of Daniel's presence beside her. No longer her lover, but forever someone cherished deeply, gently, quietly. A part of her life, softly woven into her heart, yet no longer the quiet anchor holding her back from truly living. As darkness softly settled, Daniel spoke gently, breaking the peaceful silence with quiet, powerful clarity. It's time to start again, Claire, for both of us. Claire nodded softly, feeling the gentle, quiet certainty of their decision, the weight of years of quiet denial lifting slowly, gently, replaced by quiet bravery and newfound hope. They embraced quietly, tenderly, one last time, a gentle farewell filled not with bitterness or regret, but profound gratitude for the love that had quietly, patiently taught them both the courage to finally live truthfully. I wish you happiness. Claire, Daniel whispered gently, his voice thick with quiet emotion. Real, passionate, fearless happiness. And I wish you the same, Claire replied softly, meaning every gentle word. You deserve someone who loves you as deeply as you love them. As Daniel quietly turned to leave, Claire watched him walk away slowly, his figure gently fading into the shadows of twilight. The quiet ache in her heart mingled softly with quiet relief and cautious hope. Alone now by the quiet lake, Claire breathed deeply, feeling the gentle breeze softly brush her cheeks, carrying the quiet promise of a future unknown, yet quietly, full of possibility. Standing alone beneath the darkening sky, Claire felt her quiet tears finally spill softly, freely. Tears of gentle grief mingled tenderly with quiet liberation. The silent weight she'd carried quietly for years had lifted, replaced gently by quiet strength, quiet courage, and a gentle, undeniable hopefulness. She whispered softly into the gentle night, her quiet words a promise made bravely to herself. From now on, I'll choose honesty, even if it hurts, even if it means quietly starting over again. In the gentle darkness, Claire stood quietly, heart finally open, gently broken yet beautifully whole, ready at last to face the quiet yet powerful truth. Love was never about quiet comfort. It was about quiet courage. Courage to speak honestly, courage to gently let go, courage to finally, quietly embrace the unknown. She looked upward gently into the clear, starlit sky, silently thanking Daniel for loving her quietly, gently, patiently, for teaching her that sometimes the quietest acts of bravery were the most powerful of all. Have you ever had to choose between comfortable silence and painful honesty? Share your experiences below. I'd love to read your thoughts.